Okay, okay. I am the deaf one. What that means is that I can't hear what people say to me. I can't understand what people say. So what happens with that situation for me is that I get stuck with routines from the Bush crowd. The read my lips routines, but the read my ESP, read my gang signs stuff. And although this tape is marginally, I'm just a Popeye. I realize that. Um, although this tape is marginally about um, a union of armed forces and armed forces sympathizers and what they have going in Seattle, Pennsylvania, Washington, and around the country and the world probably, who are behaving not very differently from the radical reactionary Iranians who killed a woman for showing a lock of her hair. Um, is my purpose at the start of this um, conversation with persons who may be interested in me to tell you a little bit about my experience in high school with what I consider to be the American norm. And it's under attack from all different directions. You know, a lot of homegirls suffered abandonment and tragedy during the COVID 19 pepper virus ordeal. But when I was about 17, my girlfriend, who I used to dream of, you know, I had known her a long time, never thinking such a dream would come true. You know, I was a little prettier than those days. She was really pretty, smart, you know. She had a higher SAT than me, and she was an independent woman, girl her age, my age. You know, she we dated for about a year, and she had started taking the birth control pill before she met me. I had nothing to do with that, but it was a regular activity for us to be lovers, and nothing bad, nothing awful came of it. It was just a normal. And it seemed to me she was an intelligent, liberated girl. She wasn't as emotionally volatile as my sister and my mother were, but she had similarities to them. It wasn't unusual in the arts circle of Pittsburgh for young men and young women to be lovers, even if they weren't married. And if they broke up, sometimes they remained friends for some time, even got back together occasionally. It was that sort of thing. There was no heaviosity to it. Now, heaviosity has flocked down on that situation. And admittedly, she was involved in guerrilla theater at the Irene Kaufman Center. Herself not Jewish. So some of this could have been stage acting. She had a brother named Philip who had webbed toes. You may realize from in depth readings of my correspondence with Peter Gabriel that he wrote to me, have grown webbed feet while they were working on algorithms for the web. And in delayed response to Kiss Me and You'll Be Like Me, I'm No Handsome Prince, something I wrote him in my teens. So before we had met and interviewed, I believe. So I didn't think he ever got that one. So her brother, Dale, was in theater with Norman Schwab, who witnessed my interview with Peter Gabriel in 1982 or so, when a woman named Kate Parkhouse initiated a correspondence with me. And Kathy Abel's last act was to break up with me over my jealousy to a boy in Dracula named Jury. And she gave me a book called um, The Book of Practical Jokes. So it could be that this island of tempestuousness free, Leonard Cohen, Richard Brautigan, joy of sex in our Potter's wheels. Um, the carefree existence of the American romantic liberal as a young man could have all been a put on. We know that the pitmen who had kidnapped and gassed me were from Warren, locked up in Warrendale in Newcastle. Warren, it's like Warren Commission. Dale, it's like Dale Abel, which is his name. Cain slew Abel, Warren. The index that we've seen from the Attenborough mob. Um, that Deaf Jeannie was introduced to me from, a girl with Down syndrome, who through no fault of her own was uploaded by the monastery of monarchist Democrat eugenicists, working out what behooved them to represent as the best selection process for who is included in the future and who is excluded, which I'd like to get around to. But there was no reason for any one of us behaving the way that I and my sweet friend behaved. We were not excluding anybody else, and we were not taking a toll on the Earth's resources. So it was consensual, premarital lovemaking, and this was the liberal norm of the times. And the existence of that, even as an idea, has become a casus belli, they call it, for threats to descend into World War III. Well, I don't really go in for this extremism, but it's interesting to see how it came about and what it really means about where we are on things. Now, mm, there's a lot of notes. You might take this for just the rhapsodies of a Popeye and a JFK Kennedy, hat, confused by the toxic nature of liberalism. But you see, I get surrounded by a pornographic death squad routine all the time in the comment because the way that the military played this out was as a cautionary tale about humanism's abridgment of religious fundamentalists and the Obama career Russian Orthodox Church, the cordial and candor of Barack and Vladimir convos back in the 90s. And the Defense Administration psychiatry that pertains to um, keeping close watch over weirdos that they don't two-time the girls they're deluding. The usual Salvation Army protectiveness of rival boyfriends who don't see it the way you do. So, you know, the question is, one of protocols in dating. Now, when you look at what they use to make me an object lesson At root, they had a neuroplasm impact which suffocated me and caused me near blackouts. I couldn't remember half of my life, which they wrote about in Marvel, knowing what they had done, knowing that I didn't know what they had done. And the refreshment of physical massage did something to alleviate that. It ultimately triggered convulsions that led to a do or die, remember what happened, or suffocate under the trauma. And I remembered being kidnapped in the snow by the Pitmans from Warrendale. And meanwhile, they were orchestrating the AIDS attack as a representation of parochial tutelage, which is where I mean, America makes out we're better than the Moronians, but it's a conspirator thing, with the 444, the fundamentalist tripartite days. And what you see is a mixture of disbelief that this could really be happening and a desperate need to find out if it was happening. And a bunch of girls saying, "You deserve it because you broke my heart." Ha ha ha. Play like you broke your heart stuff. Yeah, and to understand who they were, you look at what Maker from Attica and things like Warrendale. The whole index implicates Rockefeller. Rockefeller came to the Falk Library in '84 when I was stationed there. Ted Rockefeller from Swarthmore. So Rockefeller and Attica from New York explain how this litany was organized in the subtext of a war college name index around Pennsylvania, and how it operates on that level. So back in those days when I was heartbroken myself and couldn't believe it was really going on, I hadn't faced, although I was trying to. Of course, David Bowie was playing the Irish fiddle for Reagan and Obama and demanding loyalty to the master narrative of British espionage that was being peddled. Without anybody asking, what's David Bowie, that old gigolo, doing campaigning for the fundamentalists? Well, you see, they had, in those days, I used to say my biggest regret is trusting my peers. But Confucius once said, or attributed to Confucius, is that it's less dishonorable to be deceived by your peers than to distrust them. I mean, it's more honorable to be deceived by your peers than to distrust them. And that's the way I felt about it. I better to just trust them and have the honor of trusting them. And it turns out they're face lying. Well, you see, there's a lot that goes into um, understanding what kind of situation it was for me. And while they were saying it was guerrilla therapy, they were face lying. The truth was that they were, um, you know, sort of acting the part of the special education that appears in Peter Gabriel's lyrics. The poor man stands behind my back, the rich man stands in front of me, but the juggler holds another path. And it's a it's a juggler's food fight, so to speak, and it wasn't so much therapy for me as using me as therapy while other people got the message and suffered. And they wanted, commensurate wavelengths. Oh, sing in harmony, suffering in harmony. So, well, where this got off the ground was during the Vietnam War. The militarists from the Axis. There should never have been a Vietnam War. The militarists from the Axis said, if you don't want to fight for freedom, therefore you want to be slaves. Now, there was a set of leadership from Kennedy to King who were soon taught gentlemen who didn't believe that it was the choice between freedom and fighting for freedom and slavery. They believed in what the Chinese call a win-win situation, where we could help others and still have our freedom and identity and pursuits. So they were assassinated, and the choice was given between being drafted by the draft board to go to Vietnam or being drafted by the Beatles to be recreationally used by pimps and drug pushers, the so-called hair resistance. And the Beatles represent a doctrine of illegal achievement coupled to the power to exclude. Now, what that plays out as, like, is Yoko Ono confiscated, even though she tortured me, she made me into a curiosity and confiscates my life work. So, I mean, my copyright is deemed by a plebiscite with no promissory attached because it's wrong that they would use ultra high on an American citizen, for example. But tracing back to Mount Desert Island, there was a scientist named Calhoun who believed that mice in overpopulated environments began to attack each other. So, what else do you know about mice is Pavlov. So, people were like mice or Pavlovian. Rockefeller even said we are like ants. And defense administration psychiatry plays the sort of games of hypnography, bring in a symbol of a gang that attacked you and have him not be in that gang, just resembling it to see how you Pavlov. Well, you know, the same eugenic humanitarian, they claim, switchboard, which tends to use human beings as a device, installations, even me, before I knew what they were doing. So when you look at the situation that plays out in the solitary condition I've been in for 30 years, these people were absurdly draconian. Without trial, they chemically castrate me, and then they peep and they will recreate how the queer ball peeps at two different girls. That's to show why. I mean, these girls who I dated were two-timing me all the time. Two-timing is hardly a death sentence. Whatever this union of creeps may think from the fundamentalist tripartite system, but they claim, oh well, we want you to tell us as an experienced person all about your experience of lovemaking. Well, I cannot do that. I was targeted because my family were distinguished citizens of the Midwest. And it was sort of like Wanamaker had a poster called Disneyland After Dark on his wall. And this is Distinguished Citizens After Dark routine. Playing into that macabre parallelogram that they developed, the corals, to make the libertines suffer the loss of fidelity, was an undercurrent in the justification for these horrid attacks. So whether you see it as two-timing or you see it as trying to find out what was going on, working undercover, the discovery that I was right about that particular fact should uh, lead you to be very appalled by the Hollywood eugenics of a holy war syndicate. It's not really a pretty thing to have to discuss. And I do regret that I had too much faith in my peers because they were the ones that tried to normalize what was being done to me because they didn't like me as much as they liked the gorillas who were selling it as hard rock routines. So it's not really a very pretty situation in that sense. And there's a great deal about the power to exclude. So um, what we see in this um, read my lips, read my ESP indicators about tell us, oh fabled liberal, about your escapades is the ferocious tunneling of Michael Reagan for his favorite scene somewhere.